the Scale Model Show.
Welcome to the Scale Model Show, brought to you by me, Matty's Custom Scale, my camera, and the interweb. We're diving headfirst into a proper modeler's paradise. We've got fresh plastic, some 3D wizardry, and we'll dive into a diorama that's taken more coffee to complete than I'd like to admit. On this episode, I'll show you what's taking shape on my bench, unbox something rather exciting on what's in the box, take a peek at some design magic in Draftsman's corner, and later we'll get our hands dirty with a how-to. So grab a drink, clear some bench space, and come along with me and we'll get stuck right in. Bench press. It's time for some bench press. Thankfully, not the gym kind. It's where we take a look at what's hogging space on my workbench, and we take a bit of a look at what's keeping you all occupied as well. Today I'm going to focus on this Ford Mustang GT 350. It's a 1965 fastback, but doesn't quite look like the fastback that came with the kit. So I'm going to do a little bit of orientation and show you what it's looking like at the moment, and probably why it's been sitting on the workbench for a little bit too long. So if any of you are familiar with Ford Racing's Mustang GTD, that's been the inspiration for this build, and the body kit that's been developed for the kit, which is a Revell kit, tries to convert it into more of a modern racing Mustang. So this is not a one-piece body that's been printed. This is a wide body kit that's actually been bandaged and swapped onto the 1965 body in multiple pieces, and I'll show you some of them and how some of the aero starts to work. So firstly, the front end is all aftermarket, or I should say the front end is all modified and 3D printed from about the doors forward, along the bottom crease of the front quarter panel, all across the front. That's a whole new clip. And so it takes the Ford GTD venting, creates the wide body flare coming out, and then you start to get into that aggressive looking front end where the headlights are more of a 550 style Mustang. Same with the grille, it's quite aggressive. And let's see if I can get a white background on the grille. You can see the pony and the way the headlights fall in. There's some brackets to hold the new hood in. That's the new hood, which is a little bit of a mix of the standard 1965 Mustang hood, but with almost 2005 Shelby GT500 vents and some modern style hood pins. Now, after painting, or during curing I should say, it did get a little bit of a warping, so that's one of the reasons why a new hood's got to be printed and massaged into that place. That's one of the reasons why this is still sitting on the bench. I'm also not very keen on the paint job. So white with blue stripes is a Ford color. I went over it with a matte finish, but when I finished it all and took a step back, it didn't look like it was really showing off the body lines of the new body kit. So I've got to think of another paint scheme. Probably needs to be metallic if you really want to get that pop. Moving towards the back, there's some modern Mustang GTD style door handles, including the insert. So I cut a section out of the door, and the receiver, can't barely see it there, but the receiver for the door handle and the handle itself is all new. Much cleaner, much better than the molded in versions that come with the kit. The rear quarters are flared, have a vent to the brakes, are a lot more flared out. And if you look underneath, you can see where the old fender was cut away. You're seeing all the secrets now of this bodywork, but it's all part of building on the fly, building and designing on the fly. This was also part of a build-off, so time was a little bit of a crunch, but still could have been a little bit tidier. The side flares or the side skirts marry in from underneath where the venting of the flared arch is. A bit more streamlined, and then they follow the same contour as the rear quarter. And if you see on this side, there is actually the exhaust opening, which is the same contour as that side skirt. So it's a little bit more cohesive and clean. For the quarter windows, actually created some vents. Needs a little bit more bodywork to clean that up, but the vents then came into some hoses. This was a hose that was designed that would come through, and that would help some of the rear cooling. I'll show you the rear of this now, and you'll start to see why that was important. If we go to the trunk lid, you can see there's actually some scoops there. So on the one-to-one, there's coolers that actually sit in the back. So this rear grille is perforated. You can see my finger behind there. And so air would come in through those scoops and then out of these grills, and there would actually be coolers mounted in the rear. The tail lights were closer to probably a GT350 from 1967. The rear badge or filler is more of a quick fill type filler, a little bit of a ducktail spoiler, and then obviously the big aero that hangs off the back, same as the GTD. Now, a couple of other pieces which aren't on the car yet is the rear diffuser, which would sit inside the rear like so, for a bit more aero. Okay, and then we've got the big front air dam and spoiler, which would sit like so, almost like an Australian V8 supercars type of look. So that's quite aggressive. Yeah. Next, behind the grille, or the lower grille, there was this air intake, and then that would come into the engine air intake there. So quite big, but matched up with the rear bumper. And then you would get to the engine itself, which is a Ford Godzilla with a Harrop supercharger on the top, and this ducting would go directly to fit onto the engine's intake just behind the throttle body, or just in front of the throttle body. Now, if you look at this engine, it looks like a pretty small gearbox. Here's why. This is the part that really made this a very complex project. The chassis, or the platform, with underbelly aero, actually had the same Ford GTD rear mounted gearbox, and so it ends up being a torque box that sits at the back of the engine. Here are some individual pieces. So that is the rear mounted gearbox, 3D designed and 3D printed. And at the time of designing this, Ford had only released 3 or 4 photos of the actual piece, and then the rest I just had to be creative and make it up. Same with the Ford torque box. but these are the same items that are on the Ford GT. And then with some aftermarket braking, close to a Robert Linton style brake package, inboard suspension, pushrod style suspension over the top. And you can see the drive shafts on either side, the gearbox, the brakes, and the suspension. And the mounted on the top, you can see the anti-sway bar for the rear. So quite a fair bit there. And then at the front, coilovers, same style brakes. And then I just added some removable, just held in with blue tack, some air jacks. Now, this was all going great. And then once it was assembled, I realized that it was about 3 or 4 millimeters off. And so I've had to print a new chassis and go through the whole process of cleaning up and repainting that. Another reason why that's on the shelf. Now for the rear assemblies, this is the as printed rear suspension. So the coilovers, the push rods, the sway bar, and the reservoirs. And then you can see the rear assembly that would sit on the chassis, drive shafts, hubs, and the cradle. That's where everything would sit. So still a fair bit to go. You can see when you're printing big pieces like this, all looks fine, but if you can see that profile there, big flat pieces warp pretty easily if they're not managed during the curing process. So it's not all fun and games with 3D printing. Now, a couple of other pieces to show you. The wheels. I really enjoyed designing and printing these wheels. So I'll get some close-up shots, but replicas of the Ford GTD style wheel, but in a lot deeper dish, and replace the center hub with a center lock hub, similar to an F1 style center hub, and the tires with some Michelin style tires on the sidewall, but more of a Toyo tire profile tread, just because I like those two. Extra deep on the rear, still deep on the front, and they look pretty good in my opinion, my biased opinion, obviously. So there were obviously some scoops made up that would go towards some of the venting. The big cooler with detailed fins would sit in the back, under the trunk. And then for the interior, kept it relatively stock, but an aftermarket steering wheel designed, paddle shift next to it, and a bit of a sportier feel. So that's the progress on the Ford Mustang GTD/65. I'll get a few close-up details, but that's what's been sitting on the bench. Now, probability that this build will get finished before another build starts, probably low. Probability this will get finished at all, probably high. Just needs a few more hours.
The scale model show.
So that's the state of play on my workbench. As you saw, plenty of glue and fumes to keep the imagination going, a few questionable decisions, but a few victories along the way.
The scale model show.
what's in the box. Now for what's in the box. The part where I pretend that I don't know what's inside, but actually I've been checking all week. Now I get to show you. And today for what's in the box, we'll be looking at the Revell 49 Mercury. These are great. I love my customs. If you love your customs or getting creative, this is almost like a blank canvas of a kit for you to do as much as you want. I'll open it up. I'll show you what's in the kit, but also, you know, the options that come with it. It's absolutely great. So let's get stuck into it. Now, obviously the first thing that welcomes you is decals, flames, pinstripes, a few bits and pieces, a few different options, a few number plates, super cool. Now the pinstripes have got black, white and gold options for everything. So depending on what you want to do as far as your color, you've got plenty of different options to make it still work. The box has obviously got the flames on it. But I will show you another option which is also very cool. In the kit, the body, it's a pretty good mold. It's pretty clean, not a lot of flash. The first thing you see is the louvered hood style. Yeah, the way it all fits together is super tight. Very happy with that. And you can see headlights, tail lights. They're kind of already molded in, so you can start your Frenching process pretty easily. The clears, pretty standard stuff. The body is chopped already, so when we say chopped, the roof has been chopped pretty low. I'm not sure how far that chopping is. I'm going to guess about 4 inches, but don't quote me on that. You can correct me if you like. And so the windows have been chopped as well straight out of the kit, which is great. Now the chrome, I'll get a few pieces of the chrome out together because this is super cool. You've got several options of bumpers and grills, and a little bit hard to see, but these are actually some lake pipes. So if you want the pipes coming out down the side of the body, they don't actually have an outlet, they're covered. That's how they were back in the day. So that's super cool. You can customize it the way you want. You've got some old school spotlights if you want to mount those. And the wheels are chromed steel rims. Yeah, I don't think they're reversed. Usually when they're reversed, they're a little bit deeper. They've got a little bit of depth to it, but I probably wouldn't call them reversed. Still pretty cool. Next, we've got some engine bay accessories, chrome carbs, chrome. These were a beehive style oil filter case. You'd open up the top and oil filter will go in there. It's called a beehive because it's kind of ribbed, almost like what a beehive would look like. And then you've got a trophy. How cool is that? Trophy with a little Mercury on the top as well in case you want to color code it. Very cool options, very cool options. Interior, standard tuck and roll for the era. You can two-tone it with a little bit of taping, front and rear. Water pump, few accessories. The firewall is okay. It would have been cool if they had a clean version as well, but nothing a bit of sanding couldn't do. You've got some wild style wheel spats if you want to get those covered. And then I'm pretty sure I saw some smaller versions in there as well. They'll come out. Okay, tuck and roll again for the side trims. Pretty detailed and clean mold of the standard dashboard. That's pretty cool. Even the steering wheels are very clean mold. There isn't any flash, to be honest. This is a super clean kit. Front and rear of the radiator. The top is separate, so you can detail that nicely as well. Some brackets for the bottom of the chassis. Yeah, so that's handy having the radiator assembly separate. You can have like a brass color for the top of the radiator and a bit more of a black or a silver, depending on what style you want to do for the heating element itself. Engine, you saw the triple carb chrome pieces. That's the intake manifold, valley cover. All looks pretty clean. Not a lot of cleanup needed. This is a really easy kit to make a good quality piece out of, which is perfect. Some exhaust pieces, and what else we got in here? Chassis. Also, the chassis detail is pretty good for straight out of the kit. You've got to be happy with that. These are the smaller wheel spat covers. So depending on the look you want, it depends on how far you go with that. Differential with the rear suspension, the leaf springs, front suspension all looks pretty standard. Tail shaft, again, that detail, so clean. Geez, I wish every kit was like that. A few more engine accessories and the front springs and horns, which is pretty cool. And then you've got a second hood. So if you didn't want to go with the louvered hood, you've got the smooth look, which is pretty cool, and that's almost ready to go straight into paint. Now, when it comes to the instructions, it's all pretty basic, but this is a cool option where you've got the stock, the custom, and another custom set of options. So it calls it out pretty clearly. Same with the rear assembly, all pretty straightforward to follow. Now, what makes this an extra cool option, in case I want to add this to my never-ending list of builds, is Lazy Modeler, who has some great taping templates, does a scallop mask for this kit, right, which is awesome. And I've seen some of the builds using this. Those are his Facebook and Instagram pages in case you want to get hold of those, but he's actually got some detailed instructions on how to lay out the scallops. And so the idea is paint one color, which would be the scallop themselves, tape, put the masking tape template over the top of the body, follow the instructions. So you've got scallops on the front, scallops down the side. Once that's all pressed down nice and firmly, you can go over with your second color, peel it back, make sure if there's any corrections you can go through and manage that, but then knock it all down with some clear, and so you'll end up with a two-tone scalloped paint job. Super simple with Lazy Modeler's pieces, right? So that's your 49 Merc What's in the Box unboxing. Not bad at all. I'm itching to get started on that kit. I'll add it to the list of things that I think I want to start maybe soon and put on the back burner when I get distracted with 100 other builds. Now let's switch from plastic to pixels and see what's cooking the CPUs in Draftsman's Corner and coming to life in the digital world. Draftsman's Corner. So first design that we'll look at, what are we looking at? It's actually an engine. So if we flip it upside down, that's the right way up. This is a DB601 made by Mercedes and was actually used in German aircrafts during World War II. So that's where actually the propeller would sit, on that front of the case right there. So V12 inverted, water-cooled, and you can see the short stack exhaust there in the coils. And then what sits at the back is actually a big supercharger. And I'll get that airbox out of the way. But that supercharger was used because obviously planes fly quite high. The air is thinner. The supercharger helps to compress the air into the engine and run better. And actually they had the option for extra boost to outrun enemies at certain times. So if we switch to the render view, you can see, you know, some of the details of the bolts and the hooks and the way everything sort of sits. The sump is sitting on the top. I'm not sure how pressurized the oiling system was, but it's pretty fancy. This is actually 1/24 scale. Is for engines, for aircraft, sorry, but would look great in hot rods or great in diorama pieces. I think it's super cool. You can see the wastegate on the intake manifold. So yeah, lots of details, pretty cool looking thing. So that's the DB601 design, ready to 3D print those files are available. Let's switch now to the next design. So this is actually a work in progress, also an engine, and you can see it looks a little bit different. This is a V12, but what you can see there is the transaxle. So part of the sump is also the differential, 12 cylinders, lots of detail going in at the moment. That's where the headers will start to get routed around. This is where the intake manifold still has to be built. But you can see the detail on the coil packs and the valve covers themselves. And it's a Lamborghini V12. This is actually for a Diablo VT. So my plan is to have it ready for Revell kits. And if we put it into render view, there's nothing actually rendered in color at the moment, but you can see the grays, it starts to bring out some of that detail. Oil caps and casting numbers and, you know, a few plates in place. So this is a super cool engine. This has actually taken a lot of effort to get to this stage. But, you know, these are the types of challenges that I really like. So this one, hopefully complete by the end of 2025 and ready to print. And that's the latest designs off the digital drawing board. From bits on a screen to bits on the bench, it's all part of the scale modeling obsession. And remember, you can enjoy all of these designs either in digital form or physical form. The video description has all the details on how you can get hold of them. Okay, it's now time for Diorama-rama, where all of the late nights, spilt paint, glued fingers, and a few curse words finally pay off. Let's take a look. Diorama-rama. Now, every diorama tells a story. This one has a lot of plaster, and I thought what I'd do is explain a little bit about the plaster that was involved in this diorama, because the techniques were pretty straightforward and I think it can be replicated pretty easily. So the purpose behind building this diorama was actually to use up a bunch of misprints and pieces that I just had lying around. I've always got kits, exhausts lying around as well, so that's all glued as one piece. And what I wanted to do is find a way to just use all the spare pieces that I had and create a little bit of a diorama. So to do that, I wanted to create a focal point where I could put one of my car or truck builds placed in the center, and then have some lightish colored background. I know this side is not that light right now, but it will be, but lightish color to help make the focus on the car or the truck itself. So I used a fair amount of plaster, and I used it in a few ways. So I created these almost concrete blocks, and then the render that went over the brickwork on this back wall. So I did it in two ways. There were really two techniques. So to create these blocks, they're all about the same size, but you can see some are broken in different ways, and I've got these two half blocks there as well. Now the great part about having all these cracks is as you weather it, it picks up all of the corners and it starts to really bring it out. You put some washes, you put some pigments, it starts to look really, really good and adds some character, especially on some of the uneven surfaces. So I needed to be able to create the same block multiple times and be able to crack it in a way that was pretty straightforward. So I came up with this idea. So this is some square styrene rod, which is glued on, there's one corner which is loose, this one, up here, if you can see that. The rest are glued, right? So that's the size of my concrete block. And then I've got some foam board, and there was some printing on one side, so I've cut it to shape. And what I would do is place one behind the other, tape it so it's as sealed as possible on these edges, but also stays intact. Make my plaster, level it, let it dry, and then that loose corner, where is it? Popping that loose corner up would then break the seal on one side, and with a little bit of jiggling, I was able to remove it. Then I've got my concrete piece stuck on here, and with a little bit of grip, it could come off. Then it was all intact, but I'd drop it from a height, it would crack, and then one by one, I'd take those pieces, keep it in the same order, and place it. If I wanted some extra cracks, I could use a screwdriver or a some kind of pin, drill bit, whatever, to make the crack and do it that way. So that worked great. Tick there. Now on this rear wall, it was a slightly different technique. So I started with some foam board for the piece itself, and I wanted to create some bricks. So what I actually did is 3D printed a brick stencil. It says brick on the back. It says brick on the back so that I could remember that this was bricks, but that actually ended up being a terrible idea, because as I was pressing the brick into the foam and pushing on the brick text, I always had brick imprinted in my thumb. Lesson learnt. I'll change that for the future, but I pressed in the brickwork all the way across. Obviously, that's a lot quicker than doing bricks individually. I've seen some techniques where it's brick by brick, but there's obviously faster ways to do it in the future, which, you know, I'll think a little bit about. That created the brick wall texture. Painted it with a dark red and brown, you know, to get that brickwork sort of a look. And then I took some of the plaster, mixed it up, and while it was wet, sort of layered it on, heavier in some areas, lighter in some other areas, and that created this look. As that dried, did some weathering, and then put in another coat. That way it started to look like repairs, slightly different weathering, coloring, and then here you can see some more fresh colors, and then I'd pick off and crack some areas and then go back and repair it. And so you end up with a few different textures. For me right now, this is all still a bit bright and white. It needs to be toned down a little bit. That will come with weathering. But two ways that I use plaster pretty easily to create this effect. Now, very quickly, you know, I'll go into some other details later on another episode, but you know, this was all pieces of wood that were colored to look like doors. This was a misprinted doorway. Again, wood that was put on and hand lettered with some paints and a paintbrush. Some containers, shipping containers, which were printed. They still need some weathering. Some misprinted doors for a diorama, stuck together and just painted different colors. And then I showed you the exhausts. Every time I build, I probably put an aftermarket exhaust. And so all the exhausts left over went in and painted them, glued them all as one piece. So that's removable if I want to create some different looks on the diorama itself. Some popsicle sticks for the wooden fence, and you can just see it just out of view. I've got some silver aluminium foil on the edge, which is like a tin roof, but the way I did it is laid the aluminium foil on this template and then stamped it with, you know, this piece. So you've got a male and a female stamp, cut it to size, color it, and weather it. So that's what I want to show you with this diorama on this episode of Diorama-rama. So now let me close the segment before I get a few too many ideas and start making lists of the 100 other things that I want to add to the diorama. How to. Okay everyone, sleeves up. This is how to. The part where I try and make something complicated look effortless and probably end up with glue on my fingers. So what am I going to try and make look easy this time? A car cover or a tarpaulin. How do we make one of these almost custom made for the build? Great for dioramas or some extra weathered car accessories. You can see this one covers the engine and folds over the edges of the car. So how do we do it? I'll show you. Now I've got a build coming up. Put that to one side, and this will be a weathered build. So whether you do it before or after the paintwork's been done, entirely up to you. There's two options. I'll show you how I do it when the paintwork is actually finished, just so that you see that extra step. The roof on this kit is actually removable. So I've used some icky sticky tape to just hold it down across the top, and that's ready to go. I've got the rest of the chassis in there just to hold it steady and to get some bearing of where the road will be. Now, I've got some white glue. I'm using Icky Sticky's Hobbycraft PVA glue. And then what we'll do is we'll add a bit of water to dilute it a bit, and we'll have a paintbrush to get that mixed in and working. Depending on how big the piece you're doing, depends on how many times you might need to do this part of the process, and add more glue in case it starts to dry, but usually should be fine. And you'll start to see the effect of why we use it wet and why we've got to keep it going. Okay, step number one, this is the one which is specific to if you've already done the paintwork and you don't want to get any of the glue on the paintwork itself. This is what I know as Glad wrap or cling wrap, which is a clear plastic, comes in a roll usually for sandwiches or food, keeping it fresh, etc. And what I love about this is, firstly, it likes to tangle itself. That's the part I love a little bit less, but the benefit of that is you get a lot of these wrinkles. So what we'll do is we'll cover the car in this cling wrap, and it doesn't have to be super tight. It's just got to make sure it's covering. We'll probably add some tape just to hold it down, but that's kind of what you want to achieve there. Get this back section done. There we go, and then more or less the car is protected. No need to cover the exact contours of every single part just yet. As we put the tape or the tissue and the glue down, it will start to weigh a bit heavier, and it'll do the work for us. Okay. Now, tissue paper. This is your main ingredient. Kleenex style tissue paper, not your heavy thicker table tissue. That'll be a bit too heavy, but the idea is as follows. We're going to lay the tissue paper over the top of the model, and then we're going to wet it down with the glue. That glue will then dry, and as it dries it takes the contour and it should look a little bit like this. Then we've got the option to paint it, so this green one is airbrushed. If you want a lighter color, there's a trick you can do, which is take a Posca pen, and before you add the glue and the water, push the Posca pen down in the bottom and get some of that ink out. I've done it with some light blues, I've done it with some light greens, so you've got a little bit of paint at the bottom from the Posca. It's water-based, then you can probably use any water-based paint, to be honest. Then the water and the glue, mix it around, and then you're ready to go. So this next step doesn't need a rocket degree or a degree in rocket science. It's about wetting it all with the glue so that we weigh it down, we take the contours of the body, move the tissue into the areas where you want to pick up the details of the car. This one's obviously, we're more concerned with the fins, more concerned with some of the front panels where we come down on the A pillar and B pillar of the top. And as that starts to dry, which will take a little bit of time, it's probably at the speed of the water drying versus the tissue. It's one of those jobs that you do and walk away, come back later on. But the great detail you can pick up is just as you go over the edge of headlights or tail lights, is really work it in there, and that will give a very car specific sort of a look to it. Now what I'll probably also do is, as I get closer to the bottom of the body, I'll probably cut it away or bunch it up. Bunching it up probably sounds like a better idea. Let's do that. Just bunch it up a bit like that. And that looks a little bit more natural. And then we'll do the other side. Let it dry, airbrush it. And like I said, here's one I prepared earlier that will give you your cover. Easy. Enjoy. And there you have it, simple as that. At least on the 5th attempt, but we've edited all of that out and you'll only see the good one. Now let's hear from you in fan mail. This is real fan mail. See, it says real fan mail. Where we go through some of your questions, queries, some confessions of a modeling disaster, whatever it is. Let's take a look. Fan mail. Okay, so one of the most common questions that I get is, what paints do I use in my builds? And it's predominantly 2 to 3 main brands of paints for colors, 1 brand for clear, and then another brand for weathering. So these are my colored paints, and so I'll show you a little bit of what's going on here. You'll see SMS, the scale modeler supply. They're out of Australia. These are some of the best paints that I've used, and I love them. I've been using them for years. So they've got some great base colors, very strong pigment, lots of silvers that go over a black base coat. And then over here I've got some pearls that you can add on to any color or straight over white or black, some color shifts there as well, and then the clears. So these are all your candies from SMS. Then over here I've got some primers and some surfaces also from SMS. And then in the front, these are probably some of their newer colors, which is, you know, genuine Australian muscle car OEM paints, right? So candy apple red for Ford, aquamarine, champagne gold, yellow ochre, vermilion fire. If you're familiar with Australian cars, you'll be familiar with those names. Now, there's another brand that I've got for some specific colors. So I've got Splash Paints, have got a whole collection, a bundle of their OEM muscle car engines. So early Ford blue, you've got the orange red from Chevrolet. So you've got a few colors there which are great for replicas. Then if we get into the more custom paints, all of my lowriders, they'll all use tropical glitz. So I've got my ready to spray bottles up the top here. That's probably 1, 2, 3, 5 or 6 deep. As well as the silvers, so high metallic silvers, which are great before putting on your candies. Then I've got a bunch of candy concentrates, also from Tropical Glitz. So 1 tub goes a long way. Mix it with clear, or mix it with thinner, sorry, and you get plenty of spray, and they're great colors. Then up here I've got Tropical Glitz flakes and dry pearls. These dry pearls are great for mixing in with clear and putting over any other color base coat, but there's also a technique to create like a universe theme, which is flicking the dry pearls over the over a black base. I can show that in a how-to in the future, but it's super cool getting the pearls in a dry. Then for my clear, I actually use these 3 bottles. That's a 2K clear system from Glaceret. It's the same clear, 2K clear, that I use on my 1-to-1 car paints. Flawless, consistent, easy to use. All right, it smells plenty, but these are absolutely great. So these are my paints. And then there's one exception, a big exception to those paints, which is a little bit of a secret weapon, not for a good reason, but Rust-Oleum black. I paint so many items in a black. All your silvers need to have a black base. A lot of your pearls need to have a black base, so I go through a lot of black. And so I'll use Rust-Oleum, I'll decant it into a paper cup, and then I'll airbrush it. And I just go through, probably of these cans, I would say 1 or 2 per month. Yeah. So these are my paints. The second most frequent question is, where can I get those designs from? Where can we find the printed items? So it's a little bit of a mix. All the links I'll add into the description of the video. The 3D designs are mostly available through, you know, a couple of marketplaces, Colt, CG Trader, you know, the websites, etc. And then the printed items, you know, we work with some, good quality printers. We've got some printers of choice that we work with. Iceman is an example, worked with him for many years. And so that's where most of the items can get purchased from. They're all available. They all get updated. So, forums or marketplaces like Cults 3D, you buy it once, any updates or any improvements or any free items or upgrades that I add with the listing, you'll get those free. So they're all available. And the idea behind making them available is to help every builder, be able to come up with great results in their builds, right? So I hope that helps. And that's a wrap for this episode. If you enjoyed the ride, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, drop a comment on what you thought of the episode, or share your latest build in the photos through the links. And remember, if your build didn't turn out the way you wanted, add some weathering and just call it part of the plan, or blame your kids or someone else's kids if you don't have your own.